Okay, so this is pastry lesson number 10. So next week we're going to get back to some larder prep. But for today we're going to be doing a blackberry bavarois. So we're going to start this by making something called a Jaconde biscuit. This isn't necessary for the actual bavarois itself, but it does make it look a lot better. So to do that, we'll start by making a stencil paste. So grab yourself a large bowl, put in 25 grams or an eighth of a cup of butter with 25 grams or a quarter cup of icing sugar, and then beat that together well until smooth. You'll notice a lot of this lesson is sped up, and that is because there is a lot to it and I didn't want to make the video 50 minutes long. Okay, next up you're going to throw in one whole large egg white and then beat this again. It doesn't really matter if this is smooth at this point, just get it mixed in a little. You'll see that my mixture here is completely lumpy still, but it won't affect the end product. So the next step you're going to do is sieve in 20 grams or a sixth of a cup of soft flour and 5 grams or 1 teaspoon of cocoa powder. And again, just beat this together well until you have a smooth paste. Make sure there's no lumps at this point. Now with this I'm going to show you a couple of different designs you can do. So the first one is with a tooth scraper. You're going to spread some mixture onto a piece of baking paper, spread it out, and then just make a zigzag pattern across all the way. Place this onto a baking sheet and into your freezer for at least an hour until frozen. And for this next design we're going to use an actual stencil, and this one's nice and easy. Just place your stencil over a bit of baking paper and then spread some of your mixture over the stencil, making sure you keep it on the baking paper, and then scrape off all of the excess and then carefully remove the stencil from the baking paper. Again, onto a tray and freeze. So next up we're going to be making an aerated almond sponge that is going to be spread across that stencil paste we just made once it's frozen. So let's just clear these ingredients out of the way. So there's a few different steps to making this. So the first thing we're going to do is make a sabayon, and that is with the almonds. So that's 100 grams or 1 cup of ground almonds, 100 grams or 4/5 of a cup of icing sugar, and sieve them together well. If you have any leftover large pieces of almonds, don't worry about it, just discard them. And to that we're going to throw in 3 whole large eggs. And now using an electric whisk set to low to start with, so the icing sugar doesn't fly out everywhere. Just get those ingredients incorporated, and then you can turn it up to high and just whisk this until it becomes what we call the ribbon stage, and that's where you can leave it trail like this before it sinks back in. And put that to one side, grab yourself another clean bowl, and we're going to put in 60 grams of egg whites. That is about 2 egg whites. And then we're going to whisk this with 12 grams or 1 tablespoon of sugar to a stiff meringue. Whenever you're making meringue, make sure all of your equipment is perfectly clean, otherwise it can stop the egg whites from forming. Alright, so bring your sabayon mixture back, and we're going to sieve in 25 grams or a quarter of a cup of soft flour. And then gently fold that in. And now we're going to add to that 20 grams or 1 tablespoon of melted butter, and we'll fold that in too, making sure that we have folded it all in. Okay, that looks good. So next up we're going to start folding in our meringue into our sabayon. And just be careful again here, don't overfold, you'll find that all your mixture loses aeration, and then it's going to be a dense sponge rather than a well light aerated sponge. Okay, and that's the sponge element of the Jaconde done. So you can grab your stencil paste out of the freezer now that it's frozen, and you'll need a stepped palette knife for this, and then you're just going to gently spread over a small amount of your sponge mixture, and you want this to be very thin for this. In certain things like an opera cake you might leave this a bit thicker, but for this we just want it about 3mm thick. And I'll place this into a preheated oven at 240 degrees centigrade or about 465 degrees Fahrenheit for about 4 minutes, just until it starts to brown, and I mean just until it starts to brown. You don't want brown edges on this, otherwise it will be solid and it will snap. Anyway, leave this to cool for about 5 minutes, and then you're going to flip it over and carefully peel off your baking paper. You could also use a silicone mat for this if you have one. And that's our Jaconde with a stencil done. So all I'm going to do now is trim off the rough edges so that I've got a nice sheet to work with. Make sure when you're not using this you store it on a sheet of baking paper, otherwise this will stick to anything you leave it on. So next thing to do is cut out the bases of our bavoirs. So I've just taken a cutter that's slightly smaller than the chef ring I'll be making the bavoir in, and I'm going to cut out 2 circles. You will also need to measure around the circumference of your chef ring and make sure you've cut out 2 strips that will stretch all the way around the inside without a gap like this. Okay, so the next important thing to do is to make sure our chef rings are prepped before we actually make the bavoir, because we don't want to leave the bavoir mix sitting, otherwise it will set before we can get it in there. So here you can see I've got a strip of acetate, and place that inside your chef ring, making sure that it does very slightly overlap. And we'll just do the same for the other one as well. Now take a strip of your Jaconde with the stencil on it, making sure the stencil is on the outside, and place that inside your chef ring. And the disc that you cut out earlier goes upside down on the bottom to form a seal. Make sure your disc is big enough that it does touch your other Jaconde sheet, otherwise your bavoir may leak out of here. And now put these to one side and we can start with the bavoir itself. So we're going to start just with a tablespoon of water and 200 grams or 1 3/4 cups of blackberries, and we're just going to cook them on a low heat for about 15 minutes until they completely break down and we can sieve out the liquid and leave the remaining solids. You can use fresh or frozen blackberries for this and it doesn't affect the flavour too much. Anyway, once cooked, push through a sieve and make sure you get all the liquid out and you're just left with a dry pulp, which you can throw away. So back to the bavoir itself, we're going to start by heating up 180 milliliters or 3/4 of a cup of milk. This can be any milk you like, and then just bring this to a simmer and then take off the heat. Whilst your milk's heating up, take 2 egg yolks, place them into a large bowl, and to that you can add in 50 grams or half a cup of sugar, and whisk that until it is light and fluffy, and then slowly pour over your hot milk whilst whisking the entire time. And then you'll need to clean your milk pan or just use a different pan. Add the entire mixture back to that pan and place on a medium heat for about 5 minutes, whisking the entire time until it slightly thickens and coats the back of a wooden spoon like this. Be careful when heating this mixture, as if you overheat it, it will scramble. Now we're going to get some cold water and place in our gelatin sheets one at a time to make sure they are all coated in that cold water. And then you can wait about 3 minutes and it will soften, and then squeeze out the excess water and place into your hot milk mixture and just mix in. Next we're going to strain that straight through into a clean bowl. This is to make sure there's no undissolved bits of gelatin or any bits of scrambled egg where you might have overheated it slightly earlier. And now we're going to add in the blackberry puree that we made earlier and just mix that through. And now from here on out you'll want to keep an eye on this mixture and stir it every 5 to 10 minutes. As it's got gelatin in it, it will start to set, and we just want to get it to the point where it is like a thick custard. So whilst you're waiting for that to happen, take 125 milliliters or half a cup of double cream and whisk till soft peaks. Do not whisk this to stiff peaks, as it will be very difficult to fold in later and you'll end up with specks of white all the way through your bavoir. So my blackberry mix now has set to just a thick custard, which is perfect. And so we're going to fold in this whipped cream. And as always, when you're folding, make sure you don't overdo it and knock all of the air we've put into this cream back out of the mixture, because then you'll have a stiff, rubbery bavoir. Also, it's worth noting here that you're adding cold cream to your gelatin mixture, which means it's going to start setting very quickly, so you'll need to do this whole process as quickly as you can. So now this is all folded together well, pour it into a jug. This will help you pour it into your chef rings without spilling it everywhere. And you're going to fill your chef rings up, making sure you go just above that Jaconde so that you can see the actual mousse itself. And put these in the fridge for at least an hour, but preferably overnight. So now I'm just going to do a few chocolate runouts to decorate. And I've also made some creme chantilly and a coulis to go with this. Alright, let's plate this.